This is the web transcription service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. On October the 12th, at the Institute's annual Police Appreciation Evening, we were honored to host Chief of the Toronto Police Services, Mark Saunders, who chose to speak to the theme, Policing in a Difficult World.
It is a great pleasure for me to have the leadership of the Toronto Police Service in the hands of our next speaker, the very distinguished Chief Mark Saunders.
Mr. President, head table, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity just to say a few words, and I'm going to be light tonight. First and foremost, as a result of the fantastic introduction by Jim. Thank you, that means a lot. A lot of the stuff isn't true, but it sounded great on paper. Mr. President, when you spoke earlier about our relationship, I did a quick search on Ancestry.ca, and it turns out that the milkman is our father. So, but in all honesty, it is. I'm so humbled and so moved when I get to come here. I've been to the RCMI a couple of times, and each and every time, after every meal, I want to just go to sleep for a couple of hours. So this is the first time that I've eaten and I actually have to speak. But I'm with a good crowd, so I'm not overly intimidated by that. I want to thank the Piper for playing Police Song. That was excellent. Thank you so much, sir, for that. It made me feel at home, and it made my ceremonial unit feel at home too. I saw them marching in their seats as you were playing, so thank you for that. So, you know, I just want to talk about pressures and today's pressures and the way in which the world has changed so substantially. When I first joined in 1982, and I look at today versus then, and I look at the things and some of the pressure points that have significantly changed policing and changed society and the way in which we respond and the way the society responds as well. And first and foremost, I'll talk about globalization, because globalization is something that has really changed society. Globalization has made the world such a smaller place. It is a smaller place now. And so here we talk about being a municipal police service, but we're not a municipal police service. There's no such thing as a municipal police service anymore, because crimes are committed all over the world. You can have a young man in Brazil dealing with our infrastructure here in Toronto. So to say municipal right now is something that really is going to be out of our linguistic code in the years to come. But you know, we still are thinking that way. But when we talk about globalization, what it does is it forces us to recognize the world being smaller, but also to recognize the importance that we will fail as an entity if we do not learn to work in strong partnerships, if we do not remove the silos that exist. We're getting better at it, but we're not there yet. And so the next generation will figure that one out, because that is what we have to do in order to be successful. And then the second piece when it comes to society and pressures that we deal with is technology. Technology is something that is fantastic and is moving faster than the speed of light. When you can think of something, it gets created. That's how fast it is. I was watching a quick news flash yesterday, and the US is dealing with commercial entities to send people to Mars. And I know that's stuff that wasn't even spoken about years ago, and yet here we are talking about that now. So the positive components of technology is, you know, we've got driverless cars right now. And right now that technology is only going to get better. Within the next 10, 15 years, that will be perfected. We know that already. We know that by 2025, they're going to be making 3D livers, a 3D liver. So this is the technology and the rate in which technology is advancing us as society and the pressures that it has on us. Because when we look at law enforcement and we say, are we going to be still doing the exact same thing? The short answer to that is no, we're not going to be doing the same thing. Things are going to change. When you look at technology when it comes to, let's say, traffic enforcement as a classic example, with the driverless car, which will make better decisions than us because it will be able to predict better than us, there'll be less collisions. If there are less collisions, there'll be less officers. When we have the camera systems right now that deal with gigapixels, that can pull license plates from hundreds of meters away, do we need law enforcement driving up and down? Technology is 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, doesn't take holidays, doesn't take vacations, and is a lot cheaper than having to deal with a person with salary and benefits. And so when we deal with technology, there's a positive, but there's also the negative, and that's a disruptive technology. And disruptive technology is happening all over the place. I give you Kodak, I give you blockbusters. The generations in the future will have no idea what I just said. And that is because we were linear in thought process. Linear, when I talk about linear, is simply we are exposed to the environment that we live within. So as we grow, as we develop, as we learn, it's about what we're exposed to. We are a linear environment. But our young men and women, our boys and girls are global. They have access to the rest of the world each and every day, something we did not have. And so for us as leaders right now, it's a little tricky because we're linear thought process thinking. And the rest of the world is global thinking, exponential thinking, and we're not there. And so we're moving at a much slower pace. And so as today's leaders, one of the most important things in order for us to be successful, if you don't want to fail, you don't dwell on the successes that you have. That's the failure point. That's a Kodak moment. It is a Kodak moment. That is the blockbuster moment. Netflix came in and kicked them out the door because they relied on their own successes and said, how do we make our successes better? New leaders today have to deal with their present successes, but have to also equally invest in the future. What is ahead of the curve? What is in front of us? And if you don't invest in that, and if you don't think about that in real time, then you will fail. Because those two examples did exactly that, or did not do exactly that, which is why we're here today. So the chair, Andy Pringle, and I formulated the Transformational Task Force. And that's exactly what the Transformational Task Force is doing. We are a successful police entity. Toronto Police Service is by far one of the most successful police agencies in the world. And I say that because as chief, I have the opportunity of traveling the world, talking to agencies from all across the world, and a lot of people come here to Toronto, and they ask, how do you do what do you do? How do your men and women do that? How are they successful? So our existing model is good, but if we don't think exponentially, if we don't invest tremendously in what's ahead of the curve, and if we sit down in our present successes, we will fail. And so that's the message that goes out to every entity that is out there, to think from that perspective from this point forward, or else you will lose the mark. So now when we talk about national security, which I'll talk a lot about today because I think it's important, and I'm going to be giving very broad stroke things, and there's some people in here that are far more experts at it than me. But when I look at it, I see how globalization and how technology has changed things so much when it comes to national security. As I stated before, the world is a smaller place. So it's easier for us to get to places, but it's also easier for them to get to places. When I talk about technology, they could be in place already. And so we have to start thinking about exactly how things are going. So when we look at when national security has become a critical issue, it really does stem back to 9/11. It was full steam ahead. When the two World Trade Center buildings collapsed because of a terrorist act, North America woke up and we started to say, oh my goodness, we have to start figuring things out. This is horrible. It's not just them anymore. Now it's us. It's here. It's at our front doorsteps. Then after a period of time, things changed a little bit. I remember 5 years ago when I was part of the LINK program. It was very interesting because we really had to justify our existence because everyone was going, why are we spending so much money on national security? Is it that relevant? Is it that necessary? That discussion isn't being had anymore. That discussion is alive and well. Everybody knows that it is something that is going to be here for a very, very long time. But when we start debriefing and looking at what happened with that 9/11 situation, what was the problem? What were the issues that transpired and took place? We worked in silos. All of the entities had information, but we all hoarded it. We all kept it to ourselves. We didn't share it with one another. We didn't get it at that point in time. They capitalized on that, and that's what happened. So what did we do? We said, okay, well, let's rally. Let's get together. Let's start talking in a unified fashion. Let's put that information together. Let's talk about the intelligence, and let's figure out what we can do in the roadmap so that we can keep our country safe, which is what we did, and that's what happened in North America. So then what happened? Well, they had to morph and they had to change. Guess what? It's harder to do things here now, so let's fund the other places. And so you saw an uptick in the terrorist acts that went at other places in the world, because what was happening was money was getting transferred for the causes out on the other side of the world. And so we took a step back and said, okay, well, what do we do now? And so Canada, we developed FinTrack. As Donald Trump would say, follow the money. It tells you everything. We followed the money. So when we followed the money, we started to see things. And so we caused another gap. We closed that second gap that came into place. So now here we are today. Now it's different. The playbook has changed. Because now the radicalization piece is predominantly coming through social media. So we're now into the social media era, and we're looking at what the causes are and what we can do with that. And we've learned as law enforcement, well, we have to change our methodology. Because it's not only the pursuit and apprehension that is going to be successful in keeping our country safe, we also have to equally have a look at the ideology. We also have to look at their playbook and how things work. See, when you looked at it in the days of old, when you dealt with the mass casualty and critical infrastructure and things along those lines, it was the elusive plan, getting together, figuring out how to do things. You had to have the bomb expert. You had to do all kinds of different things, survey the place, this, that, the other. And then the police would do their surveillance and their intelligence. We follow people around, and then we find them, we make the arrests and the apprehensions. Now we fast forward to today, where it's changed. Now you've got a caliphate that's going on. So it's low income, low sophistication, but high impact. You don't need to spend a lot of money. You don't need a lot of investment in order to create fear. Willowridge, classic example. All you need is 2 machetes and gas to run somebody over with a vehicle. Look at Quebec, the exact same thing. Look at Ottawa, the exact same thing. Look at our Canadian forces right here. So low sophistication, low income causes that same high impact, which is happening, and it invokes that fear. And it's that sense of, you know, we've got a caliphate that we're developing here, but if you can't afford it, then sharpen your swords, and you can do your part anywhere in the world that you are. And so we have to take that strong look at finding that ideology is just as equal to the pursuit and apprehension piece. You know, when we were thinking in the old school, we thought, you know what, if you chop the head of the snake, then you've won. So when we killed Osama bin Laden, when we killed Anwar al-Awlaki, didn't do anything. Did very little. In fact, more people have died under terrorist acts because of their death. And so that ideology piece is something now that we have to look at more than ever before if we're going to do it. But then what's happened is an inverted triangle now, when it looks at what are the keys to success. Before, the community played a small role. The intelligence piece played a big role. Now it's the other way around. Now the community plays that big role. The community. Because the community is going to be the first to identify whether or not little Johnny is thinking differently, whether or not little Johnny has different values and beliefs right now, or he's ready to act upon or could act upon, which gives us an opportunity that if we start to build stronger relationships with our communities, there's an opportunity that they can talk to us so that we can do the right thing. Whether it's intervention or apprehension, ideally in a perfect world, we have the opportunity for the intervention piece to stop that behavior from occurring, which is stuff that we could not talk about before because our only role before was pursuit and apprehension. So the bottom line is, this is this evolving circle that we continuously continue to do each and every day. But it's not all doom and gloom. It's not all doom and gloom. I can tell you right now that as things are working in the city of Toronto, we have a very strong and vibrant working relationship. We don't think municipal when it comes to national security. We have assets that are embedded not only on a municipal level, but on a provincial level, on a federal level. We work well with CSIS and intelligence, all those other agencies. We share information because we all have that common goal of doing whatever it takes to keep the city of Toronto, whatever it takes to keep Canada safe. And the last issue that we saw that we had to deal with, we worked so well together. And it was such a classic evolution of how things have changed so substantially with the footprint as it deals with national security in Canada. So this is not going to change in the next 5 years. The world is a different world. And it will be that way for a long time. Things will not change in 5 years, 10 years, 40 years, or in our lifetime. But the most important key, the most important role for us in order to make this thing work is the fact that we have the opportunity to work even stronger as partners in sharing that information and having that common goal of making sure that our boys and girls, our next generation, have that opportunity of walking to and from school safely or to that playground safely. And it's because of the fact that we have learned to work as strong partners. I'm so glad that you've had the opportunity of calling this Police Appreciation Day, but I want to reflect that and say to the military, to the armed forces, to the Navy, thank you for so much that you do, for all the work that you do. If we're going to talk about who gets unthanked the most, it is you. And there isn't a day that goes by in our family that we don't think about the great work and the great sacrifices that you have done for us, for making Canada one of the strongest democracies in the world. Thank you so much for all that you do. And I thank you for this evening. It means so much to me and to the Toronto Police Service. Thank you very much.
Many years. If you could sit down, and perhaps those of you who'd like to ask questions of the Chief Saunders, do we have any questions in the audience? Yes, over here, Danielle.
Chief Saunders, you essentially alluded to human intelligence in your speech and a shift away from essentially signals intelligence. So, in that context, how has the Toronto police force changed in terms of shifting to the human intelligence world? You talk about in terms of flipping your triangle or pyramid upside down.
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. And when we talk about the preventative measures, I'll give you a classic example. So the LINK program, Leadership in Counterterrorism, I'm part of the executive. I'm the secretary. You can tell by my hands. But when I was on the course, there was a very strong focus on from other agencies, and I won't name names because that's not fair. That it was about pursuit, apprehension, elimination, and I had to sit on a panel that spoke about preventative. And the fact that we have to look at the ideology, that we have to look at counter-narratives, because the absence of a counter-narrative in social media means that the narrative that's out there has to be the truth. And so we have to invest in that equally. We can't just go about doing it this one way. And I can tell you, people were incredibly angry with that. And at the same time, we were formulating an entity that looked at that pre-criminal space. Because right now, the way it is, parents know the kids better than anybody else. And so when they know that, I say Johnny, hopefully there's some Johnny in here, I'm not pointing at you, so let's get that straight. But things aren't going well. They haven't crossed that line of entering into criminality, but the thoughts and the things that they're saying aren't right. When you're talking derogatory about how your sister's dressing and things like that, just a little bit too extreme where the imams aren't holy enough, they're too afraid to call the police. Because in their heads, they're thinking, if we call the police, there's only one thing that's going to happen. And John is going to go to jail for a very long time. The family gets stigmatized. And so what we have done is we've been working on a multi-agency level to say, what can we do to look at that pre-criminal space? And so from law enforcement, the necessary role that we have to have is to say, we don't just have one lens. We understand and appreciate all of those things. And our role in that pre-criminal space is not to figure out how to turn it into criminal and to make the apprehension, but to say, can we move this person over here where there are people that can help so that we can change that thought process. And so there is an onus for us to have a stronger relationship in encouraging that pre-criminal space and making the public making the public understand that we get the big picture. And so I think that's what we're moving towards, and we're getting very good traction with that right now.
Yes, any other questions in the audience? I know it was, Rod.
Good evening, Chief. You've talked about policing by technology. You've talked about globalization of law enforcement. Would you agree that there is always going to be a need for the area constable to be constant?
No, absolutely, and so that's a very fair question and a fair point to make. Where I think the flaws are with the research and the science and things like that, when people start doing correlation with why do we need this many police officers, they always coordinate it towards crime. You know, crime is down, therefore do we need that many police officers? But what everyone seems to forget is that 80% to 90% of what we do is crisis intervention. There's a difference between crisis intervention and preventing things from happening. You've got 2.8 million people. We're the third largest city in North America, next to New York and LA. We're it. And when you've got that many people living in a very small population, and we're the most diverse, we've got over 140 languages, people aren't going to get along. And so computers, at this point in time, thank goodness, are not going to have the ability to deal with that crisis intervention. People still need that face-to-face conversation to mediate, to mitigate, to do all of those things. So our role from a crisis resolution will increase. But I think from the menial things that we do, that is going to decrease. And so the disruption pieces, if I start saying with the existing model that we have, I need this many people for traffic enforcement, and this many people for that, and this many people for crisis intervention, and if I keep thinking that way, then I'm going to fail. But if I have to say, hang on a second, I have a feeling that technology is going to reduce this because they're going to do it far better, far more superior than us, and over here, however, I have the opportunity of promoting what we are needed for, then I think that it's a win-win for everybody. I do. So yeah, in our generation, you know, men and women dealing with crisis intervention is going to have to exist.
Yes, over here, sir.
Yes, Chief, I have a question. We've been very fortunate in this country that there has not been a polarization between street people and police, which have resulted in armed confrontation almost at a weekly level, or even more often than that in the U.S. But some of these trends in the U.S. tend to eventually happen up here. In terms of longer range strategy, what is the department doing to prevent that kind of stuff from happening up here?
That's a fair question. And so, I mean, it goes back to the crisis intervention as well. And it's very hard to do the comparative with Canada versus the United States. They've got completely different dynamics. We were talking about it at the table here. The United States has over 300 million firearms. So for them to go to a domestic versus us to go to domestic, completely different situation. You look at what happened in Florida the other day. We lost 2 officers going to domestic because of firearms being involved in the equation. They got 300 million of them. So we have opportunities, and we have more opportunities to work stronger on the crisis intervention. So we have committees and subcommittees that talk about the social issues as well. Now, I will say, one of the big things with policing is, and the big complaints in North America, or not North America, the United States and us, is that everybody gives the police responsibility for everything. And I think we need to figure things out a little bit better. I think that there are agencies right now that, well, I'm not thinking, I know, there are agencies right now that are not stepping up to the plate. They should be the primary responsibility agencies for situations. So a classic example, mental health issues, people that live with mental health issues. In Toronto, we respond to over 24,000 of those calls a year. We shouldn't be doing that. There need to be other agencies that step up to the plate that deal with that. And after 8 o'clock in the evening, we're it. We're the sole providers. When you have law enforcement that has to look after people that have mental health issues, that's a setup for failure. And at the end of the day, there's no win for us. So holding others accountable, magnifying exactly what the numbers are and what the issues are, I think is something that we're moving towards with the Transformational Task Force. And so you'll see other agencies that are going to step up and start to take ownership on those very things.
Are there any other questions in the audience? Because you can get to meet the chief. Go ahead. Fellow from the RCMP.
Sir, regard to, we want to bring the United States into this, but inescapably, it's always part of what we do as well. And during the presidential debate last week, both candidates had a fantastic opportunity to offer a solution to well, the strike that's going on in the larger cities in the States. It seemed obvious to me that they had an ideal opportunity to recommend that their solution would be to have far greater representation of minorities in all of the law enforcement agencies. And I'm bewildered as to why they didn't seize on that opportunity. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm watching the debate incredibly. I think it's the best free TV going on right now. But when it comes to that very issue, it's an incredibly complex issue, and there are a lot of moving parts for the right answer, and it takes a lot of time and patience and legitimacy to get the right answer. And so I don't want to oversimplify it by saying, you know, if we reflect our community, then we're going to be successful, because that's a failure. It is an entity, and I think it's an important entity, because it does provide hope. And when we have people that are in law enforcement that understand cultural nuances, the starting point for a good dialogue is much quicker than having to sift through all of the nuances to get to points. So it's a factor, but you know, when you look at Republican versus Democratic, they're two complete different issues. One is law and order, and then the other is I don't know, together forever. It's fantastic philosophically, but the reality is you've got to invest in community, and are you willing to invest in community? So neither are necessarily correct. It is a conglomerate of all of those factors, because we have a small percentage of community that are criminally minded, and people tend to forget that. My men and women every day will deal with people. I've got people outside on the street right now that will shoot you in the face. So, you know, all of the social things, you know, taking little Johnny to a retreat camp and saying, you know, shooting someone in the face is not the right thing to do, is not the right method nor the right resource for that particular type of person. We have to go through the deterrent factor. But the things that we have to do to prevent little Johnny from saying that's the decision that I have to make, and then taking him to retreat at that point in time is critical. So having the right resource in the right place at the right time is what the key to success is, but also understanding there is a natural failure rate within that. Sometimes the right resource isn't in the right place at the right time, and so deterrent is something that's necessary. So instead of giving the all or nothing, there has to be the ability of saying, it's a hybrid, it's a combination, and you have to deal with that situation in that moment at that time, and that's the right solution. So I think that that's kind of what things need to look at from an overall perspective.
Are there any more questions? Okay. At this time, before we thank the chief for what I think was one of the best speeches I've heard in a long time.
Well, thank you very much.
It's just very eloquent, very appropriate, very meaningful.
Thank you.
Very action-oriented. But before we actually formally thank you, I'd like to recognize two people in the audience. We have two veterans from World War II here. Charles Godfrey, just in the row here, and also Charles Scott Brown. Charles Scott Brown.
This has been another in the ongoing series of podcasts brought to you as an educational service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. You can keep abreast of our web offerings as well as our live events by visiting our website at www.rcmi.org. Once again, this is Eric Morse saying thank you for being with us and good night.